Welcome to the monthly broadcast of the Utah Valley Technology and Genealogy Group. My name is Gerhard Roof, and I serve in the presidency of this nonprofit 501c3 educational organization. We normally start with a word of prayer, and Carol has offered to do that for us. Go ahead.
Okay. Our dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for the opportunity that we have to meet in this way, that we can be in the comfort of our homes or wherever we might be and be able to listen and learn more how to do genealogy and how to research areas. And we're grateful, especially today, for Robert Gibbons for the time that he's taken to help us today and to be able to share his knowledge of vital records, how important they are, and where we can find them, as sometimes they can be difficult. That we're grateful for his expertise and for the way that he teaches. It does such a great job and is easy to understand. And we're grateful for all of our blessings that we do enjoy, and pray that thy spirit will be with him as he presents today. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Carol.
Uh-huh.
Today is the 10th of January, 2026. Our next monthly broadcast will be on the 14th of February. You can receive notification of the monthly speakers and their topics from our news release blog and from our website at uvtagg.org or blog.uvtag.org. We welcome the supporting members of our group on this Zoom broadcast and anyone else watching using the Facebook Live version on our Facebook page or on the recording on Facebook and our YouTube channel after this meeting. If you would like to make comments or ask questions during the broadcast, please use the chat feature on Zoom or post them in comments on Facebook. When the presenter asks questions for the audience and you are on Zoom, you may also unmute your mic and turn on your camera to interact directly. Good morning, Marilyn. Did you want to make a comment, or let me have you turn off your video? If I have a quick reminder for those of you who have formally joined UVTAG or would like to support the group by joining, your membership dues for the year 2026 may now be renewed online at uvtag.org or by mailing in the form provided in the monthly newsletter. We are pleased, as you've already heard, that Robert Givens is teaching us today. The title of his presentation is The Place of Vital Records in Family History Research. He describes it as follows. Family historians rely on vital records for many of the details that are needed to complete the research on their ancestors. When available, vital records should be your go-to records. This presentation will explain what vital records are and why we seek them out, challenges in using them, what specifically can be found in them, and when we can find them. The records we can substitute for them, and a family search tool, guided research, that makes finding vital records in select areas easy for everyone. That latter comment for what happens when we can't find them, not when we can. I'm particularly interested in this topic because with the recent interest in artificial intelligence doing research for us, we sometimes forget that nearly everything we learned through those methods needs to be verified, and vital records are the best resource for doing that. Uh, Robert Givens has received degrees from Fresno State College and California State University in Fresno. His career in education spanned 39 years as a teacher and administrator, and he started researching his family history during his high school years and has been even more actively involved since his retirement in 2008. Uh, when he's not researching, he loves to travel, garden, read, and watch sports on TV. He's had extensive research and provided input for FamilySearch, the Research Wiki, and has specialized in New England, Midwest, and Southern state records. He's even published 4 genealogy books and has presented on genealogical topics in multiple states. We're waiting. You're ready for you, Bob. We enjoy having you come with to us periodically.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Let's get this started. I do a little cleanup work here. I get my screen to where I can see what I'm doing. I find it hard to talk and also look for things at the same time. There we go. Now we're in business. Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I seem to be your go-to January person. I think this is the third or fourth year in a row now. But you came at me this time and said, let's do your vital records presentation. And I thought, well, that's interesting because I do like about 20 a year in my calling for training for consultants. And this was one of them that I did last year. And it was probably the worst viewed of any presentation I've ever done. And so I was telling Gerhard, I said, this is kind of like apparently it's not a very sexy topic because nobody wants to watch it. But I think he and I both agree, or your organization and I both agree, that vital records are really important. And so this is a topic that needs to be discussed, whether it's a popular one or an exciting one. It's sure not as much exciting as when you put the word AI on the screen and then everybody's fighting to see. So anyway, we'll go through this and whoa, going too fast. Gerhard read through basically the things we're going to cover. I tried to do like everything you'd want to know about a topic when I do one of these. So we'll cover a little bit of everything on this. So to start out with is what are vital records? And so I went to that great font of all knowledge, Wikipedia, and looked up the word vital record. And this is what it had to say. It says vital records are records of life events kept under governmental authority. So we're talking about birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates, and other various things, divorces and whatever. But the main ones are birth, marriage, and death that are handled by the government. In some jurisdictions, vital records may also include records of civil unions and domestic partnerships and on and on. But that's basically what we're talking about. We're talking about governmental records that document our birth, marriage, and death. And by the way, while we're looking at this particular slide, I do not have a regular syllabus for this class. What I did share with your leaders was a PDF of the slide deck that you're looking at. And so you're going to be presented with an opportunity to go through my OneDrive and get a copy of the slide presentation turned into a PDF document. And that way you get everything that was written and shown. Okay, these are what we call in genealogy primary records, at least for the thing that is germane to the document. So on birth, it's the birth information. That's primary information. It was created, the document was created close to the time of the birth. On a marriage license, the primary information is the actual information about the marriage. And on the death record, it's about the death. And that's one we have to really be careful about, because most death records include things that happen much earlier also, like birth. And those are not primary records. Those are what we call secondary records, things that happened a long time ago and got recorded much later. So it's important to understand on each document what is the primary information. And so basically, the reason these records are so good is that we are given a primary record of a date, a place, and the names of the people that were involved. And that is really helpful when we're doing our research. And so the question might be, well, why is it so important to use vital records? And the best way I can do is to give you an example. This is a copy of the 1920 census with my mother as a 2-year-old child. And on it, it shows her small family. It shows her dad and his wife, Carrie, and their daughter, Elizabeth. But the question is Elizabeth really the daughter of these people? I mean, the census record says they are. Is there anything better? Well, ironically, going to vital records, I couldn't go to my own mother's birth certificate because I can't find it. I hate that when something like that happens. I've got to go back and order one from the state of New Jersey. I'm sure I had one at one time, but my mother's been gone now for 30 years. And somewhere during those 30 years, I've lost her birth certificate. But I do have her death certificate. And so even though this is secondary information, who her parents were, because that was from a long time before. In fact, both of her parents were long dead before the information could be recorded. And I was the person providing the information, so I'm doing all this secondhand. But it says on here that her mother really was Helen Alcesta Sands. And I know that that's the truth, because my mother, her mother, my grandmother, died of complications of this birth about 2 weeks after my mother was born. And so the Carrie that's in that census record is not my mother's mother, it's her stepmother. In fact, I actually even have a letter from Claude, my grandfather, to Carrie, who would later become his wife, telling Carrie about the death of his wife. And see, Helen and Carrie were nursing buddies. They had gone through nursing school together and were best friends. And it turns out that my grandfather ends up marrying both of them. And so I know the backstory, but I wouldn't have known that if I didn't have other information beyond that census. Well, that's why you got to be careful using anything other than vital records, that they're not always straightforward with what they say. Okay, so the bottom line is vital records are your best source usually, if you can find them. And that's always the challenge. There are limitations to this. And many of us that do much research are aware of that. What I love is when you have a newbie genealogist come up to you and say, well, I need a birth certificate from the 1600s. And you don't find birth certificates, vital records in the 1600s. And we know that, it takes us a long time to learn all these ins and outs of things. But we know that vital records are available in different areas at different times. If we're doing US research, New England's a great place to have ancestors from, because they kept vital records all the way back into the 16th century. And so that's nice. If you're in the Northwest Territory, where I had some of my ancestors, you might be able to find some vital records even in the early 1800s. And usually the marriage records, interestingly enough, were the record that most areas, most localities started their vital records with. And so you can often find, when you can't find birth and death records, vital records, you can find marriage records often. Okay, well, the 1900s was the time period where most of the United States had vital records started. And in the early days, like you see on the bottom of the page here, they weren't really certificates as such. In many places, they were in register books, and they would be a line in the register. This is says probate court, but that's where the births, marriages, and deaths were being recorded in Pennsylvania in the early 1800s. And this happens to be a birth record for one of my great uncles. And it's just a single line on there where it gives the date, his name, and where he was born, and the names of his parents, and then sometimes the name of the doctor. But that's what preceded the certificates that we are familiar with in more recent times. Okay, so what do vital record certificates tend to include? So I went through and we'll talk about each of the main ones. Birth certificates tend to have the name, place, and date of birth. And that's definitely primary evidence. Most of the time, they will give you the names of both parents, sometimes the age of the parents, their residence, if they were married. This happens to be from Arizona. It's a very good birth certificate for my older brother because it has all these things. It has the child's, some of them have child's birth order, which is very helpful. So this was my mother's first child as she reported it. It gives me the address of the mother. You do have to remember that a birth certificate, the only parent you can really guarantee 100% is the mom, the one that birthed the child. So that's why the focus on the mother's address, because they can feel comfortable that that's the child's mom. Anything about the dad can always be questionable. And so, like it says here, be careful. Father's information is not always accurate. It may say J.J. Givens was the father, but he may, in fact, not be the biological father. DNA will tell us that. Also, be aware that if you're looking for an adopted child, most birth records for adopted children are sealed, or many of them are sealed. Let's put it that way. Some of them are starting to be more and more open to the public, but in general, they were kept private. But this is what you'll find on a typical birth certificate, at least some of those things. Marriage records, the first thing about marriage records is there are multiple marriage records. There are licenses, there are certificates, there are register recordings of it, there are what they call returns, and there's bonds. So there's multiple types of records involved here. And if you've ever wondered why you'll see a marriage record supposedly recorded as a source with one date and another marriage record with a different date, it's because they could be different things. In fact, the one you see here is actually two documents. One is the marriage license, which was taken out on the 25th of September. And it happens to be that they got married on the same day. So the marriage certificate is also dated that same day, but they could have been dated on different days. And if one person was sourcing just the license part, they would give the one date there, and then the marriage certificate, when it got sourced by somebody else, would have a different date, usually a later date. And so you have to be aware of those things when you're working with marriage records. And a marriage record may, notice the word may, that's important because they come in all various forms and variations, have the names of the bride and groom, the date and place of marriage, sometimes the residence of the bride or the groom, sometimes their birthplaces, ages, and occupations. Sometimes their parents' names and residence, and sometimes the other relatives, the witnesses in this case. And so there's a lot of different things that you might find on the license, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just find their names and the date and place, and that's it. But it varies from location to location. And so one of the things to do is always look very carefully at the document. Make sure you've extracted everything from it. And I think in this one, I can just tell a little backstory on it real quickly. Uh, my mother and my grandmother was, or great grandmother, this is my grandparents. My great grandmother, Krista's mom, was not real excited about this marriage because my grandfather had not been a member of the LDS church and joined so he could marry her. And he was a minor, had a lot of minor habits. Let's just put it that way. And so she wasn't real excited about this wedding. She didn't stop it, but she wasn't real excited. So therefore, the witnesses turn out to be one of my grandmother's brother and his wife, and then a sister of my grandmother also. There's three witnesses there, but not her mother. Her mother was not a witness to it. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. There's sometimes little backstories on documents that, if you can ever find them out, make the documents even more interesting. Okay, and also you got to be careful that there are licenses that are issued to couples that never actually get married. They change their mind afterwards. So just because you've seen a license doesn't guarantee a marriage. Okay, and then there's the bonds and attached permissions and all kinds of other little things that might pop up. I know in my own marriage, because I was 20, and at the time in California, 20 was under the legal age of marrying for men. I had to have my mother go to the courthouse with us and vouch for me, whereas my wife could do it on her own accord. And we were the same age. That was kind of embarrassing, but that's some of the things that you will also find in the records when appropriate. Okay, death records. Remembering the only true primary evidence on here is the death, the actual information about the death. But in the records, you will find a wealth of information usually. You'll find the person's name, birth date and place, death date and place, age at death, occupation often, marriage status, names of parents if known, and if they're surviving sometimes, the spouse, if there's a living spouse, cause of death, date and place of burial often, and the informant, which can be very helpful because knowing who the informant is can help you in guiding the information about the information here. In this case, the informant happens to be the oldest child of the deceased. So you would tend to think it's fairly accurate. But because things are recorded long after the other events occurred, you've got to be careful and not just accept them on face value. So using that same document, knowing that the oldest child of Jenny Elizabeth Sands is the person who gave this information, let's look at how accurate it is. Well, to start with, the name is false. Her name was not Jenny Elizabeth. She was born Elizabeth Jane, and of course her maiden name was Beck. You're not going to see that because she was a married woman, so she has her married surname. I won't hold that against the record keeper, but the Jenny Elizabeth versus Elizabeth Jane, uh, I do hold against my great great aunt because she didn't know her own mother's real birth name. And that's because Elizabeth didn't like her name Elizabeth. And when she got married to Henry Harrison Sands, she decided to start going by Jenny Elizabeth because she liked to be called Jenny. In fact, my mother was named after her, named Jenny Elizabeth. My mother hated Jenny, and so she always went by Elizabeth. So I love it. The two women did the exact opposite of each other. And my poor mother never knew, because we didn't find this out till after she passed away, that her grandmother's name really wasn't the name she had heard. Oh, my battery's running low. Yes. To rectify the situation, helps to put power to your machine. Okay, so anyway, the name's wrong. The birth date itself is fine. That agrees with the family Bible. The death date obviously was correct because that's primary record. But the birthplace only says Ohio. It doesn't have any details because, again, my great great aunt did not know exactly where in Ohio her mother was born, but she was born in Ohio, so she got that part right. The parents, though, were totally false, for she did not know her own grandmother's name. She said her grandfather was Daniel. Well, she met a Daniel Beck, but that happened to be the brother of her mother, not her mother's father. Her mother's father was actually a John Beck, and it took us many, many years to figure that out. And then to get the name of the mother took even longer. And we finally nailed that one down, no pun intended. She is Mary Catherine Nail. And eventually we got that information. And of course, like I said, the source of this was the oldest daughter of the deceased. So, like I say, you've got to be careful with death certificates. There can be a lot of false or misleading information there. Okay, as I mentioned before, prior to those certificates, there were often single line registrations that were used. In Arizona Territory, where my father was born back in 1908, that's the system that was used. In fact, my father has multiple birth records because he has one for the town of Globe, Arizona, and he also has one for the county. This is the county record. And these registrations are interesting in that uh, they sometimes are a little different than what you might expect in the way things got put in there. Now, the birth date for this record is right. If you look at the very top of the first column, the wide one, that's October. The date was the 30th, because this was the date my father was born, and the year was on here somewhere. It's kind of darkened out, but it was 1908. When it comes to the name, it just says Givens. Now, how do I know that that's my father? Well, the date is right. It's a male. He is white. And then here's my grandparents' names, Josie and Krista Givens. So knowing that, I know this is my father. Why not a first name? Notice of the 10 or so that you can see there, only 2 have first names listed. And that's because this is back in the days of the doctors going from house to house delivering babies. The doctor would get called and Krista's having her baby. Will you please hurry and come? So he would rush over there and deliver the child and then have a little notebook and record that he delivered a male child of Joe and Krista Givens on the 30th of October. And he probably said, okay, what are you going to name him? And my grandparents looked at each other and said, oh, we don't know yet. He said, fine, I've got to go. I've got another one to go tend to. And so he wouldn't record a first name and leave that up to them. And so you will find many of these early register type records for births without first names. So you have to be a little bit of a detective to identify who the person really is. Okay, now I've talked about the United States, and we call our records that the government puts out as vital records. In many other countries, you will find the equivalent, but they are going to be called civil registrations. Civil meaning governmental registrations, but they're essentially the identical thing. The thing that's nice about them is many countries started their civil registrations in the mid to late 1800s. And so their vital records, civil registrations, go back in time further than the ones in the US do. And so that's nice, but you're going to be looking for that term, civil registrations. The one I show you is from Scotland, and this is one of my wife's relatives who was born in 1862. And this is his civil registration transcription. Of course, you'd want to see the original document, but I'm sure my wife's got it somewhere in her genealogy, and I wasn't going to go digging through all of it. So I'll take the transcription, which is always a dangerous thing to do, because you want to see the original record. But they say they serve the same purpose as ours, with the added bonus of going back in time a little bit further. Okay, so the main point is, okay, we're going to try to conduct our research for as long as we can using the vital records until we reach that point where we can't do it anymore. And at that point, we have to start dealing with substitutions. And in honesty, vital records are not universally available. Sooner or later, and sometimes it's sooner, the well runs dry on you. You can only research back in time as far as vital records were kept. And even within that framework, sometimes you're going to discover that those records got destroyed or lost. Or you're going to find, especially towards the beginning when they first introduce vital records, many of the births, marriages, and deaths never got recorded. Their record was never created. They'll usually say, like for a U.S. state, that birth certificates started in 1915 and were pretty much universally complied with by 1925, let's say. You're going to have a 10-year period or a 15-year period there where it's hit or miss, in all honesty. So even though it says it started in 1915, that doesn't guarantee you're going to find everybody back to 1915. And then on top of everything else, you're also going to discover that transcribing documents can be difficult. Sometimes they just make mistakes, and other times the writing is so illegible that it's hard to read it. And so that makes the record unfindable, even though it exists. And so there's a lot of issues with the vital records and when they run out, because they tend to run out before you would think they would for many of us. Okay, so what are vital record substitutes? Well, those are the things we use most of the time when we're doing research and we're ignoring vital records. It's all those other records out there that might lead to giving us a clue to what we're looking for, a clue to when the person was born, or who they married, or what their name was, or when they died and where. Okay, so one I want to really point out is church records. I think they do not get quite the recognition that they should, because they're really truly another form of vital records. But these are church produced vital records. Oftentimes, I know in the Catholic Church, they're called sacramental records because they cover the sacraments of baptism, marriage, and burial. And so the baptism kind of covers for birth and the burial covers for death. Sometimes the records actually include both, the birth and baptism date or the death and the burial date. But other times it'll just be the baptism date and the burial date because those were the sacramental events that occurred, and that's what the church was recording. But these records, in many places, especially outside the US, are pretty universal, and or at least they're very common. And they go back to about the 1500s in many areas. And so we're talking about a record set that is a great substitute that often we kind of ignore. Partly because when we're working here in the US, we have usually a multitude of different churches. And we don't even have a clue what church our people went to, let alone which church building they attended where the records were kept. And so for us, it's oftentimes not as important a record as it would be if you were in Mexico or if you were in the United Kingdom or Italy, where you have, many people belong to the same church. And so these records are fairly easy to trace. You just have to learn to use them. So I love church records and do a lot with them in other countries. They have their limitations. Not all churches kept good detailed records. Some of my mother's German relatives were members of the Church of the Brethren, and that's kind of equivalent to the Amish. The Church of the Brethren kept no vital records. They kept no sacramental records. They didn't keep track of birth, marriage, and death. The only record they had was a yearly meeting. Gratefully, most of them within a generation or two of coming to the U.S. joined the Lutheran Church. And the Lutheran Church has great birth, marriage, and death records. But as Brethren, it was a dead end, very hard to trace. You've also got to deal with the fact that they could be lost or destroyed. And since they're church records, often they were just stored in somebody's attic. Excuse me. And so there's often that problem. And then not all events were necessarily recorded because some people weren't religious, and I have some relatives like that. Okay, but everything considered, I think church records should be probably your second go-to type record after the vital record, civil registration route. The next one ought to be church because that's the closest thing to the vital record image that we've been talking about. Okay, in the US in general, birth substitutions can be death records that have the person's age or birth, the Social Security applications or death index, census records, cemetery records, church records, military records, Bible records, and there's others. But these are the main ones that in general will do what you need, at least to give you a general idea of when a person might have been born. For the marriage records, you're looking at newspaper announcements, church records, obituaries, military records, and sometimes that, like the wife wants a pension, then they have to provide a marriage record to get that pension. Death records, sometimes they'll name the deceased spouse. Census records, you got to be careful. We've already seen the example of that and how it can lead you astray. Bible records, and then bands too. Bands are those documents that were posted on the door of the church for 3 weeks consecutive saying so-and-so's getting married, so that anybody that was going by might notice it, and if they had a complaint, would have a chance to complain. And so there's various different things there. And then for death records, there's a lot of different things you can do for those. In the US, we have the Social Security Death Index and the Numident Social Security applications and claims records that have just become available the last couple of years. Cemetery records, obituaries, newspapers, probate, wills and inventories, distributions, those things. Tax records, city directories. Oftentimes in the city directory, it'll say Mary Jones, widow of John Jones, who died, and he put his death date there. Church records, census mortality schedules, like in 1900, there's a mortality schedule for people who died in 1899. One of my great grandfathers landed in that one. And Bible records. So there's a lot of different ones. But how can we find specific help? Okay, because those are some general ideas that work in general, that some places have certain things that are more evident and available than in other places. And so you need to learn to use the research wiki for a lot of different reasons. But here is one definite one, that if you're going to help others or want to do your own research smartly, you want to get used to going to the research wiki. And of course, go over to FamilySearch under the search menu and go down to where it says research wiki and click on it. And this is basically what the home page will look like. And there's a search box there and a list of localities. I use the search box and I put in a place. Okay, and then once I get that place in and I find the page that has all the good information about that location, then I want to look in there for record finder. So I can actually go on here and I can put, for location, I can put like Missouri and then the word record finder. And what that'll do is it'll bring up a chart that has all kinds of different records. It'll talk about vital records like I'm showing here, or maiden names, family members, immigration, personal details, and on and on. But the whole point of this is it's a what kind of records are available for this. So in looking in Missouri specifically for vital records, I have a column here for birth and death and birth date and place. It'll tell me the best records to search, and it gives me a list of them. And if I can't find anything in those, then the next best or alternative records would be these. Now, those are links. Those are hot links, and they're not links to just a general article on vital records. In this case, for this one right here, it would be an article on vital records in Missouri. And church records wouldn't be just a general link to church records. It would be where to find specific church records in Missouri, where to find cemeteries in Missouri, where to find newspapers in Missouri, where to find obituaries in Missouri. And the same thing with marriage and the same thing with death. And then, of course, if those aren't any good, then you try the next best records. And these will vary from location to location based on what's best available. You will really see a difference if you're helping somebody or doing your own research in another country. You'll find very different groups of records listed here. So this is a great way to take what you and I, as old-time researchers, may have spent decades learning and be able to pick this up in a few minutes and know within minutes of a place that I've never researched before, what are the best places to go? What are the best things to do? Now, FamilySearch went one step further, and one of my project managers that I worked under was given the assignment to create guided research, or a program that became called Guided Research. And the goal here was to develop a program so that even a novice could go in and try to find a vital record for somebody and actually find it a majority of the time. In fact, their goal was to create a way to find an answer to your research question 80% of the time or better if records were available. That was the key thing. It was done and designed for localities around the world where there are vital records or civil registrations that are readily available at FamilySearch and other places to be searched. And so they put this together and a few years ago released it. And it's found when you go to that wiki opening page, there'll always be a box over here that says to jumpstart your research. It looks a little bit different today, but it's still pretty much the same thing. It says, let's go to guided research. And so when you click on that, it gives you a list of places that this works for. So there are 22 localities around the world that you can use this with: America, Samoa, Australia, Canada, Costa Rica, Czechia, Denmark, England, Fiji, Finland, Ireland, the Isle of Man, Italy, Jamaica, Jersey, Mexico, Netherlands, Norway, Puerto Rico, Scotland, Sweden, the United States, and Wales. These are all localities that have a lot of vital records or civil registrations, whatever the case might be, available online. And so I'll show you how to find a marriage record. In this case, we're going to try to find my great-grandparents, second great-grandparents, 1818 marriage in Ohio. So I'm going to click on the United States, and then it's going to give me a list of states. And I'm going to go to Ohio. And when I do, it's going to give me how to find birth records, marriage records, and death records. So here's the marriage record section because I'm looking for a marriage record. And it has usually has two categories. Start here, and then if the record wasn't found, try this next. So this is your primary source. And they will not just show you FamilySearch sources. In this case, the primary source is a document called United States Marriages, Ohio in this case, because I'm looking for Ohio, from Find My Past. And you might think, what the heck? Find My Past is for Europe. But Find My Past, to get more people to subscribe, created a database, and it's the largest single database in the world of any website, a single database that covers all the known marriages that they could find for the United States. Over 200 million marriages are in that database. And that's why it was ranked as the starting place. And so you go there first, and if you can't find it, then FamilySearch will give you a second chance. In this case, they call it Ohio Marriage Collections. They're here at FamilySearch. And if you go to list of all collections, it shows you the 4 main databases that they pick from. And of course, there's going to be overlap. And so it's possible you're not going to get just one record of a marriage, you're going to get multiple. So I clicked on that to see what would come up. And the very first 2 records that come up are the marriage of my grandparents, second great grandparents, Daniel Beck and his wife. One says her name's Anna Lee, and the other one says it's Leah Ono Lewis. Interesting. I remember these are transcriptions. That's why you want to look at the original, because neither one of them are 100% accurate. So we'll go over to one of those documents, and it says, okay, here's the transcription at the top, and here's an image that was taken from. We can see in the indexing column that they put along the side here that her name's really Leah Ono, and his name was Beck Daniel. And so they're having trouble. One puts first name first, the second one put last name first. So when you go look at the actual document, it says Daniel Beck to Leah Ono, comma. There's that little comma there. And on the other side of the comma is the justice of the peace who married them, Louis Bell, JP, Justice of the Peace. And so the transcriber transcribed this Leah Ono Lewis. And so you have to really be careful. In fact, her name's really just Leah Ono. And so, but this was used using guided research, which made this so easy. I didn't have to do any work, hardly, just put in the information, tell them where to go look, and they did the researching for me through multiple databases to come up with this marriage record from Ross County, Ohio in 1818. So guided research is a place that for those specific 22 localities you want to teach people to use, at least when they're getting started. Okay, because guided research really made this an easy to find record. Okay, so in conclusion, our goal in any family history research is to identify complete information as possible and to fully identify our relatives. If we can't use the vital records, which are so wonderful for this, then we need to find substitutes. And if we're even having trouble, then go back and try the vital records from the last program that I showed you there, guided research. And hopefully you'll be able to find the record you're looking for. But in the bottom line is good luck in finding your ancestors, but try to find the real ancestors. One last thing, I do like 20 of these a year. And so I have my own channel. I do a lot of training for consultants for the LDS Church. And so I put them under a my local family history, Family Search Center. It's called Fresno North State Family Search Center Trainings. You'll find about 110 or so presentations altogether. And this is where I also put a link to a blog that I run where I list these same presentations with a hot link to the presentation at YouTube where these are found, and also to the PDF of the slide deck, the one that you're able to access because you attended today. I hope this helped you, and it's time for questions. And I'll stop sharing so we can see each other. So do we have any questions, or did I put you all asleep?
You're a good man, Bob. Online, we've had one or two things. I, I, I asked the people on online where they were calling from, and one indicated he was from Texas. Very few commented, but I personally have one or two questions or comments here. One thing I found that helped me in my research of vital records, almost all my ancestries that I've been researching are over in Germany. And German handwriting is a real challenge in the vital records that you do find. And so I was looking in some of the church records, for example, that you mentioned as a substitute for birth. And it listed the birth of somebody that I was researching. I found it really handy to use some of the modern artificial intelligence on that. I used Transcribus. I took an image of the online record I found at FamilySearch and asked Transcribus to first of all interpret it. And it interpreted it in German and it posted it in German. and it did a almost as good a job as Google does with their translate when you type something in. But Transcribus was reading the handwriting, and
Yeah.
uh, and it did a really good job, almost as good as uh, what ended up as a translation from Google. And then I translated the German that it came up with into English. And that was really helpful because there's often much more information in those records than just the name, date, and place that we focus on, and that's typically in the indexes for those. And so, like you mentioned, often the witnesses end up being relatives, and finding those connections really expands your knowledge of interactions between family members, and that helps flesh out the vital records information. I see you've used that from your nodding, I assume.
Yeah, fortunately, most of my ancestry that I research are here in the U.S. That German stuff looks Greek to me, but my wife does it all the time because her family is like second generation Americans. And so she has had to spend decades working in Greek and in German records. And she does not speak, really speak or read German, but she's learned the genealogy stuff pretty darn well. And, the AI is good, but you always got to be careful too, because it can make mistakes. And it's good to try two or three different transcriptions to see, or transcribers, to see what they come up with and compare the differences. And, but it's a great advancement over the naked eye, especially when you're not trained. And I hate it. I usually turn it over to my wife and say, "Here, help me." I'm lucky if I can find the names myself, because I don't do
Yeah,
enough of it.
I understand the feeling. I'm curious, when I've done in more in the past some U.S. type of research, I really used books like the Red Book that has great listings of sources by state and county and different types of records and what years they cover. I guess the research wiki and the guided records that you were describing is really much more up to date and will include things that weren't included in books like the Red Book or printed sources or uh, yeah, those types of things that we used to use more readily.
Yeah, that's always the problem with a printed book. As soon as the book's printed, it's out of date. Whereas a wiki is a wiki and it can be changed daily. And so it tends to be a lot more up to date. And I find it very easy to use. Doesn't cost any money. I don't have to lug it around. I just need an internet source so that I can get to it. But I think that it was really an inspired program. I think we need to use it more. A lot of times we kind of forget that it's out there, and that's to our detriment because it can help us find things so well.
Right, right. I did not get any specific questions from Facebook um, of the people that were watching there online. Um, does anyone on Zoom have questions? Doesn't look like it right now. It is 11 o'clock. This is a normal time we end. I'm surprised. We're right. You're perfect on timing, Bob.
This one worked out that way.
All right. Well, we appreciate your taking the time to help us review those very basics that all of us need to still spend time on. Without the most accurate information in our records, we don't really have a record, to use a scriptural phrase, worthy of all acceptation, to do what uh, we feel is our interest and our requirement.
That's true. But vital records will help you get there.
Amen. Uh, Thank you again, very much.
Surely.
And for the rest of you, we'll see you come next month.